have Dr. Julia Smith who's doing her presentation on Otherwise Occupied, Investigating Complex Relationships Between Gender and College Attendance.
Alright, well this is the first time I've given this talk without my comrade Nancy Neby, who is my partner in crime on these sets of studies. Alright, well this is the first time I've given this talk without my comrade Nancy Neby, who is my partner in crime on these sets of studies. And what I'm talking to you about today is actually 3 different studies that are all kind of interrelated. It's always interesting to me where research comes from. This study comes from being stuck on stage at commencement and watching all the graduates go by and being bored. And when the sociologist is bored, they start counting. And what I was counting was the number of men. And every year the number of men got smaller and smaller. And so, of course, being a good academic, I went to the internet and I went and looked to see whether this was just a figment of my imagination or whether this was actually out there. And there's actually some debate out there. We have people over here who say, nope, there's no gender difference in college attendance. If you look at the ACT, SAT data, it's exactly the same. And I thought about that and I said, wait a minute. If you're not going to college, why are you taking the ACT or SAT exactly? So that's not the right sample. The sample to ask this question is, you need it national, not just one university, and you need it at a point before they've decided or while they're deciding maybe they're going to go to college. We need 10th graders. So we started pushing at this question of whether there was really a gender difference in college attendance coming out of high school. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about, and you're going to listen and be bored by. So, otherwise occupied. This is actually the end of the conversation. Our hypothesis was that perhaps boys are otherwise occupied. They're not going on to college. They're doing something else. And a lot of our curiosity was about what kinds of things are taking boys versus girls to college or not to college. Now, we don't have the data to find out yet where they might be going if they're not going to college, so that's another whole set of studies. This is not a new conversation. This isn't a new issue. This happened about 100 years ago, except the conversation was about high school. A lot more girls than boys were going to high school, and there was a lot of hand-wringing and moaning and groaning about what is going to happen because the boys aren't going to school, and they must not be educated, and whatever are we going to do with that? And they don't want to become engaged in education. And as you move into 100 years later, we're having exactly the same conversation, except now it's about high school. It's not about high school, it's about college. Going to college. And it's coming out in the popular media, certainly. Except there's also some argument that it's not about gender, it's about income. So as we went pushing around these details, we decided we wanted to really pull this thing apart. There are 3 frames or theories that are informing the conversation about gender and college. One is critical feminism, whereby the experience of being a gendered person in the United States impacts all kinds of decisions that are available to you, as well as the meaning of the experiences that you have. Cultural production is centered around the conversation. Very complicated and don't talk to each other very much theories into one paper. It's really kind of awkward, but I think we pulled it off. What we're basically dealing with is these nested circles. power, privilege, and culture as they are identified within the context of gender. Now, I'm a sociologist, and I like numbers, and I like lots and lots of numbers. So I go find data. The data I'm using in this study is from 2002. It's called the Educational Longitudinal Study. It is a nationally representative sample of 10th graders. Across the country, these are 10th graders. Now, this has already got a layer of remove because that means the only people we've got in the study are the ones that made it to 10th grade. We don't have any of the ones that dropped out in 8th grade. We don't have any of the ones that dropped out in 4th grade. Those are the two other times when they dropped out. What's interesting about ELS 2002 is the Feds do this study every year, or every 10 years maybe. In 72, it was high school and beyond. And then in 82, they did another round of high school and beyond. Then in 92, 88 to 92, they did the National Educational Longitudinal Study, which is NELS. 2002, they did Educational Longitudinal Study. Now, I used to teach statistics out of NELS. And in NELS, 1988, graduated from high school in 1992, there was no gender difference in graduating from high school. Until 2002, more boys are dropping out. That's different. In point of fact, that's the first time in 150 years that more boys than girls have dropped out of high school. Now, it's 2012, but unfortunately the 2012 data won't be available to us till 2018. So in 2018, we'll be able to see whether there was another gender difference. But in the meantime, we've got this. We've got gender, we've got family social class, which is made up of income, parental education, and occupational status. And if you don't know what occupational status is, there's a guy at University of Michigan named Greg Duncan. And he took a list of all the occupations there are, and he ranked them by prestige. And so if Greg Duncan thinks your occupation is more prestigious, you get a higher score. And that's what it is. Happily for us, educational professors get really high scores. Wow. As a former student of Paul Pintridge, I personally was very interested in attitudes and how attitudes were playing out a potentially gendered role in attending college. So across the survey, they asked questions about how important various things are to you. Importance of taking care of your family, importance of finding a partner, importance of friends, importance of relationships, in other words. Then mastery work orientation, that's Marty Mayer's term. It means how important it is to be considered successful in your career, how important it is to have a good job, to learn a great deal about your occupation, those kind of, I want to be a good at my work. Pursuit of college information, that's really straightforward. Has the 10th grader talked to their parents about going to college? Have they talked to counselors? Have they talked to teachers? How many teachers have they talked to? All from the student perspective. And then, of course, the importance of college. That's a very simple question. How important is it for you to go to college? I didn't say it was good data. There's a lot of it. All right. To figure out how these things are related to going to college, and now I have to back off of that college term, because I've been saying college, and college gives you the impression of nice ivy-colored buildings, and you go there for 4 years, and you walk across the stage, and it's a bachelor's degree. No. Post-secondary education. That means something past high school. So, you did graduate from high school or got an equivalency, and you got something past that. Vocational school, community college, other kinds of training, for-profit college, and four-year institutions. PSC means any of those. Logistic regression allows us to examine the impact of continuous variables like attitudes or social class on the probability of attending post-secondary education. We did a moderation analysis. We tested whether gender had a different impact on these other predictors. Or in other words, whether, say, attitudes were different based on whether you were male or female. Where we found interactions, we split the sample by gender to see what the pictures look like. So, what do we have? First of all, the ACT-SAT data are wrong. Girls are 81% more likely to attend some form of post-secondary education experience out of high school than men. Now that doesn't include non-traditional students going to college for the first time after doing something else out of high school. If you include them, those people are 70% female. So then the gender difference becomes really big. This is a pretty big gender difference, though.
Julie, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So we know that an inordinate number of ethnic racial males don't make it there. Is that skewing the data? Because their population is, in a sense, so skewed that if you would put them in a normal range, you'd have a different result?
No, because there's only one group for which there are more boys than girls going to college, and that's Asian Americans.
Okay.
In every other ethnic group, more girls than boys are going to college.
But isn't it inordinate among Hispanic and African American?
Not among Hispanic, it is among African American.
Okay.
The problem with the African American sample is that we lose the African American boys before 10th grade, so they don't even show up in this sample. So once the African American boys have made it to 10th grade, they are proportionately more likely to go on to college because we already lost all the ones that weren't going to go.
Is that why you didn't disaggregate for race? Okay.
All right, the first conversation that my colleague and I wanted to have was about social class, because everything that we read said, this isn't really a gender thing, it's a money thing. So we wanted to pull apart social class by gender and see what exactly is going on here. Now, the critical feminist perspective would argue that social class should make more of a difference to women because women are a disempowered group. It should make less of a difference to men because men have power independent of social class. That's not what we found. We found the opposite. Social class is much more important of a predictor for how valuable a person finds going to college in 10th grade for boys than it is for girls. And in all of the graphs here, the solid line is boys and the dotted line is girls. I tried to do blue and pink. Nancy rejected that as being really awful. So you're going to keep track. All right. When you actually look at going to college, not just how important they thought it was in 10th grade, whether they actually went, without any other adjustments, no adjustments for how they're doing in school, no adjustments for anything else, social class makes more of a difference for boys than it does for girls. Or to put it another way, when you're really down low on the social class scale, it's taking boys out in much larger numbers than it's taking girls out. Remember, these are all 18-year-olds.
Well, Julie, can I ask,
Yeah,
is
please.
that more of a socialization factor? Because men are then picking up the idea that they have to be income providers?
It's entirely possible. We're going to see another suggestion of that in a couple minutes.
Julia,
Yeah.
again, I know you mentioned this, but how were income, occupational status, and parental education, how was that combined?
Well, you z-score each one and then you factor analyze them together. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that. The National Center of Education and Statistics does that.
All right.
Yeah.
Julia, given that this is 2002, does military attendance figure into this? It's right at the beginning of your, shortly after the beginning of the Iraq War.
Yep.
And we also have that idea that more people in the lower socioeconomic classes enter the military than the higher.
Yep.
But I just don't know if it's big enough. You know, if this were World War II and it was massive amounts of people,
Right.
I'm not sure the Iraq War was enough people to really skew your data.
I don't know. I think that that's definitely factoring in there, especially on the low level. When you adjust for GPA, math achievement, reading achievement, the things that would contribute to going to college, social class really plays as a big difference for men, not so much for women. And for men, there's a nonlinear relationship. It starts to flatten out its effect around the middle of the social class spectrum.
And another piece of that is if military is included,
Mhm.
you have to maybe differentiate between military as a form of post-secondary education
Mm.
as opposed to just simple service.
Yeah. At this,
I can't afford to
we
go to
can
college, but
probably go push at the data to find military service in the 2006 follow-up. I don't think we can differentiate type of military service relative to post-secondary. I think if they're in some form of college, they're counted as post-secondary.
I had
Yeah,
another
go
question
ahead.
that came to mind was the quality of high schools. I know
Mhm.
that you might have some students that have high GPAs and might be valedictorians, but get to
Mhm.
college and can't cut it because of the quality of their schools.
That's definitely relevant for college success. I'm not sure it's relevant for college admission. So I think that would be a further down the line kind of question. That's a good one. But I don't know of anything that's going to make a higher quality high school for boys than it is for girls. And that's a problem. We do actually have desegregated education by gender. So we've got a finding here that's solid, it's consistent, and it flies in the face of theory. Social class is more important for boys than it is for girls in getting them to college. The next thing we wanted to look at was goals and values. So this is that mastery work orientation I showed you. We anticipate that mastery work orientation is positively related to attending college, i.e., the more you feel invested in good job, becoming successful in a career, the more you would be likely to go to college to accomplish those goals. More so for women than for men. This is the one that got us attention. We put together a composite of how important is, and then a bunch of different relationship variables. They factor analyze together, they make one construct, but they work in the opposite direction for boys and for girls. For boys, the more importance you place on relationships, the less likely you are to go to college. For girls, the more importance you place on relationships, the more likely you are to go to college. So that made us think maybe there are different drivers here. So we pulled it apart again. We went to all that trouble of putting it into one variable. We pulled it apart again. And there are really two different ideas buried together there. One idea is family, and the other idea is friends. And the importance of relationships for boys is driven by importance of supporting family. That is, the majority of their response is taken up by that. Whereas for girls, the majority of their response about importance of relationship has to do with peer relationships. Either family is a given for girls, or it just isn't relevant to their conversation about relationships.
So let me can I ask
Yeah.
another, what about divorce rate? It seems to me that the rise of divorce rate would have some effect in females' attitude toward the future, because if you don't have a male figure providing income, and you look at your life saying that I'm the only one that can provide that, wouldn't that also cause a rise in growth by gender?
That would explain some, if not all, of the gender differences in non-traditional student attendance at college. I don't know how you would play it out for 18-year-olds, because there are as many boys being raised by single mothers as there are girls being raised by single mothers. And the information being communicated there, I think, isn't relevant to family structure, but we haven't specifically tested that out. What we did test out was this, there is a section of the survey that actually asks why you decided not to pursue post-secondary education if you didn't go. For boys, 29% of them who decided not to go on to college are citing family reasons, as opposed to only 19% of girls. More importantly, the need to support my family is 3 times as important a negative predictor of attending college than it was for girls. So the role of I need to support my family, family is important to me, is keeping boys out of college.
That sort of supports what he was saying.
Yep. On the other hand, this college-bound peers, we have a very big difference between girls and boys, first of all, in their level of reporting of how many of their peers, their friends, are going to college. And it's a much more important predictor of going to college for girls than it is for boys. I gave this information to the nursing faculty 4 or 5 months ago, and they invented a new thing called Bring a Friend to pre-service. So what they discovered was that for girls, if the girls brought a friend with them to attend the information meeting, both of them were more likely to enroll. So, go-go manipulation. But what it says to me is that relationships and going to college are a really different social dynamic for girls than they are for boys.
Should we clean that off? What?
Mm-hmm.
So could you hypothesize that girls could have an inordinate influence about boys attending school if they move in a direction, meaning they take their boyfriends and zeros?
I think in order to do that, they have to persuade them not to be taking care of their families.
We're not making families.
Or not making families that they have to take care of, exactly. So, our hypothesis concerning cultural power was completely disconfirmed. It works in exactly the opposite direction of what we had anticipated. It leads us to suspect that college may mean something different for girls than it does for boys, particularly at the lower SES levels. It may be that boys are looking at it more instrumentally than girls are. Girls are looking at it literally as a credential. If I do this, I'm much more likely to be able to take care of myself, whereas boys are saying, this isn't going to get me the job, I need a job now. And they're not going to go. That's also similar to what we found with mastery work orientation. Boys don't seem to link college to work in the same way that girls do. And then we were just discussing this issue of relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, that brings up the question of the prestige level of the occupation.
Mm-hmm.
How many non-college, let me see if I get this right, non-college requiring professions that are male-dominated are more prestigious than the non-college female-dominated
Right.
professions. Did
I
say
don't,
that right?
you did, and I don't know exactly how to address that. We have a grant that we're revising to try to get some funding for. Looking at exactly that issue in the realm of technical and computer sciences. Because historically, the gender conversation in the sciences has been, if we can only equalize education, then we'll equalize opportunity in the career field. And our suspicion is that's actually not going to be the way it works. That if we equalize education, education is going to shift in its position and not be part of what it takes to become successful in a career. And for support to that, we have the legal profession, in which female lawyers are becoming relegated to family law and male lawyers are becoming relegated to corporate law. We have medical profession, where women are family pediatricians. And interestingly enough, we have pharmacy. There's a lovely set of studies done in pharmacy that show that as gender becomes more equated in pharmacy school, pharmacists have become more segregated, with men pharmacists going into business pharmacy and women pharmacists going into hospital pharmacy. And guess which one gets paid more? All right. So we have some interesting problems here. And the big problem is the credential line. Yeah, Marie. Yep. Oh, thank you. When I was doing my dissertation work, I was looking at algebra as a credential, 8th grade algebra. And what I had predicted in my dissertation has come true, that if more people get access to 8th grade algebra won't become the differentiator anymore. It'll move down the scale, and it has. Now it's 6th grade algebra. I suspect that in part because higher education is in fact becoming a place where women are, it's also becoming a place where men don't value as much. Now, having said that, in the last 5 years, it starts to be swinging back. I've got more men in nursing. We've got more men in teaching. I taught a master's cohort of teachers this summer that was 11 men and a girl. That hasn't happened to me since 1984. So I think there are also economic changes that are going to press where people are.
I think another factor is that there's a lot of very physically demanding jobs that do not require college education that I can see men having easy access to that females would never have.
Yeah.
And so females may go, the only way for me to have a decent income and be okay is if I go to college.
Right.
That's not true for men.
Right.
There's a lot of jobs, I think,
And I think there's some bias in there too. How many people are going to hire someone coming in to fix their washing machine or whatever, it's female.
Mm-hmm.
well, there may be bias, but I mean, I think there's a lot of physically demanding jobs that women are not going to be able to do as
Yeah,
well.
because we
And,
are so very weak
you know,
and
like road
fragile.
construction.
Dean Gallion, let's
I'm
chime
not
in.
interested in what territory, I'm interested in just what,
Yeah.
what seems
Go ahead.
to be
Joe, I'm assuming you reject the small body of nature that's suggesting that teachers are not doing a good job of teaching boys anymore. And of course, that becomes a reverse feminist argument because they're saying basically, in our rush to try to get girls through the educational pipeline, we have now put boys as second-class citizens in the classroom. I'm assuming you reject
We're
that.
I don't know if I reject it. I think it is something separate than this.
That wouldn't explain why boys don't want to go to school if they're not being educated well.
Is that research anymore?
It might.
Is that more on how?
And in fact, that was our initial driving hypothesis was that college is not a place where men go. It's not a male place to be. It's not a male thing to do. I would probably be more likely to buy that if there wasn't this strong high social class, high college for boys. Social class sending boys to college says something different might be going on. But there's an issue there with the work-employment connection that we haven't successfully teased apart. I think that a lot of the stuff about whether or not boys belong in school it doesn't quite hit what's going on in high school and college. It does hit what's going on in elementary schools. But it's a kind of shifting conversation. Yeah.
I wonder if the same argument you mentioned about we talk about the feminization of medicine and nursing and stuff. It would be interesting to look at the more prestigious colleges if that gender rate evens out.
Yeah.
And then, if that separation still happens.
I have a suspicion that given the social class line, that the higher, more prestigious colleges are also the places where the higher social class people are sending their children.
Sure.
And so it may come
More egalitarian.
more egalitarian. But it's really hard to differentiate whether that's coming from the student or coming from the college.
Sure.
But it's definitely a place to go. So, my goal has been to give you some things to think about. My dad always told me that if you have one good, interesting thing that you thought about because of a presentation, it was a good presentation. So, thank you very much. And as these lovely children go by, count how many are boys and how many are girls.
There's more boys here.
Yay!
I'm bored.
You like how we timed that?